You've been listening to a CBS News special report. I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. We continue that coverage that Nora mentioned. President Biden says he's approved a disaster declaration for California as 3 major fires continue to burn. He added the federal government will do everything to assist the state as it deals with this disaster. We begin this hour with the warning from the president saying that the fires now are expected to continue, quote, well into next week, but that the federal response will continue to be robust, with hundreds of federal firefighters joining thousands of local and state firefighters on the ground and dozens of federal aircraft also in the skies helping put out these fires. Let's get another update on the situation right now with CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen, who's in Pasadena. Tom, what are you seeing at this hour?
Hey there, well, we're in Pasadena, standing outside of the exhibit hall and ballroom. Just a week ago, this was the site of the Rose Bowl parade. Well, now it has turned into an emergency relief and disaster relief center that's housing some 1,200 people, young and old, families, single people, the elderly. So many people are here, and they're not just here from the Pasadena area. They're actually here from all over Los Angeles. And I want to take you around here so you can see exactly what we're seeing on the ground. You can see that food trucks have lined up over here, offering free food for people who are in need. We've also seen people bringing bottles of water. A woman over here is making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Really, people in this community are doing anything and everything they can in order to help. Now, this is all unfolding as 5 fires around Los Angeles continue to rage. We are closest to the Eaton fire right now. We're about a stone's throw. We're not right on the fire line, but we're far enough away, we're close enough, I should say, that I don't know if you can see on my shirt, there is a flecks of ash that keep on falling out of the sky. It kind of feels like little flurries of snow, except for it's ash from the fires, and that explains why I am wearing this mask. That speaks to not only the immediate danger of the flames, but also the danger that you can't see, which is the air quality in this area. You know, as you look up at the sky over here, you can see that the sun is pretty much clouded. That is a layer of smoke. That is a blanket of smoke, I should say, in this area, and that's what's affecting people. So when you're considering that a lot of the people in this area are the elderly, they are especially susceptible to issues and conditions that come with pollution and air pollution in particular. So that's front of mind of a lot of the people who are here right now. But currently, a lot of the people here are waiting to see what's left of their home. They may have been evacuated and not had a chance to visit the neighborhoods that they left behind. In the drop of a hat, time after time, the stories that we've heard are people being woken up in the middle of the night, having to leave on a moment's notice to get out of the way of the Eaton fire. Unfortunately, that fire has claimed hundreds of structures in the Altadena area, which is nearby here. So a lot of people anxiously awaiting a chance to get back to what is left of their homes. Back to you.
Tom Hansen, thank you. You could see the ash. You could hear it in his voice as well. It remains a perilous situation there. But coming up, Jimmy Carter, the former president, is back home for good in Plains, Georgia. This afternoon, his family is gathering to lay him to rest. We will get the latest from the Peach State of Georgia as America says goodbye to the 39th president. Stay with us. You're watching CBS News 24/7. America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Jimmy Carter will be laid to rest in his hometown of Plains, Georgia this hour. This just moments ago, the U.S. Navy conducting the traditional missing man formation over the Plains, Georgia residence of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, paying tribute to a former sailor himself, the 39th president, who is being buried after several days of national remembrance in his home state of Georgia and here in Washington, D.C. earlier today. A private funeral service is being held at the local church where he used to teach Sunday school. Joining me now as we observe these final moments of remembrance for the former president is Susan Zirinsky, the former president of CBS News and executive producer of 48 Hours, now president of See It Now Studios and part of our Paramount family. We call her Z, so forgive me if I'm calling her Z and you wonder, what on earth are you saying? But Susan, so great to see you. The reason we have you with us is because you were a White House producer back in the 1970s during the Carter administration, working with our colleagues the late Ed Bradley and the great Bob Schieffer and Leslie Stahl, among others. And you spent a considerable amount of time in Plains, Georgia. Remind the viewers, what did that small town mean to him, and how did it define his presidency?
I think for Jimmy Carter and even the press corps, Plains was a core value of who this man was. There was no pretense. The town of Plains, the city of Plains, did not even have a stoplight until he was elected president. First stoplight was installed. Plains had with it this kind of fiber of humanity, this absolute, just genuine, organically real people. There wasn't a lot to do. There was 2 blocks of Plains. I'll show you some of my Jimmy Carter souvenirs if you want.
Sure.
There wasn't much to do but shop in those 2 blocks. This is my Jimmy Carter bottle opener. And then I, of course, had, because church was very hot in the summer, Jimmy Carter fan. And then, of course, the ashtray, which says, I went nuts in Plains, Georgia. But so for the press corps, it was this sort of shock. But for Jimmy Carter, it was his base. And, you know, when we would stake out the president, like we were in a field across from his house. You know, he would take off, we would take off. He would go to his mother's for lunch. We'd be in the sun. She'd bring out cookies and lemonade. It was a sort of an island of intellectual reality for him, because there was no one who didn't know him. There was no one who didn't call him Jimmy. There was a safety, a comfort in that town. And I think even, you know, as the presidency went on, we always went back to Plains. It was his touchstone. He always went back to Plains. He always went to teach church. He always took a walk in town. He always said hello to everybody. We went to the peanut warehouse more times than I'd like to remember. So Plains for him, his core, his center core of moral and humanity.
And if not his home, it is that church that those cameras are outside right now. We were just looking. We should look back at the hearse there, parked outside the Maranatha Baptist Church, and they're inside the church. This is where he taught Sunday school. This is a church he helped found and helped build. His family is going to take part in a private funeral service just for family and a few other invited guests. And from there, they will head over towards the Carter residence and make a stop through tiny downtown, if we can even call it that, Plains, Georgia, all of 2 blocks of it or so.
Indeed.
Z, are you among those who had an opportunity to attend services at this church?
Yes. Mostly I was standing outside in the heat. But yes, I had been in that church.
As reporters do, not because you didn't want to go in, but because we wait outside.
There in the fan came in handy. What was interesting, that on certain occasions, we would pull up to the church and the president was going to teach, and there were demonstrators who were outside the White House who ended up showing up outside the church, and you were like in awe. But this was the presidency. I mean, the church was just one of the foundations. It was like a second home to him and his family, quite frankly.
Well, why don't we pause here for a moment and watch as they bring him into that home one last time. So this is what we call the body bearer team now, carrying the late president into the Maranatha Baptist Church. You will hear, I believe we can hear, "Hail to the Chief" in ruffles and flourishes one last time as they bring him into the church. His family, who has 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, being brought inside Maranatha Baptist Church in his hometown of Plains, Georgia, one last time. And what is sort of a strikingly American scene. You know, he began his day in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, was carried out of there, brought to the National Cathedral, two of the most regal pieces of real estate in our nation's capital, but he gets brought home to a very simple Baptist church. That shot outside could be any parking lot at any American church anywhere in the country, and I think that's part of why the family wanted to do it this way today, is to reinforce the simplicity of his life and his deep faith. And we will hear during this ceremony from his children, who have not spoken publicly much since their father's passing, but chose to wait until this service to speak out here and at his burial a little later in Plains, Georgia, as the sun sets. Susan, this caps a big day of political intrigue that, like I said, began here in Washington, where we saw 5 American presidents, current, former, and future, all gathered together at an event that he all asked them to attend. We don't get to see that too often in American history. It was quite a scene earlier today.
It was definitely quite a scene, and I think the interesting thing for Carter in Plains was an experience I had, and maybe I can squeeze it in here before people start to talk. He had lost the presidency. It was days away from the inauguration. You know, the press corps was very slack in how they covered him, and we were staking him out across from his home, and just the camera crew and me, and no other network, no other folks were there, and he takes off. Secret Service, the guy with the football, the nuclear codes, definitely attached by handcuffs to his wrist, and we follow him, and he pulls off into a kind of side road, and motorcade stops, small, 3 cars. And I get out, and I'm the White House producer, so I am a respectful distance behind. And the president turns around and he motions, so I turn around to see who he's motioning at, and I realize, well, he's actually motioning at me. So I move forward, and I said, it was very quiet and still, and I said, Mr. President, where are we? And he said, well, we're at the family cemetery where my family and some of Rosalind's family are buried. And I'm quiet for a second, and I said, what are you thinking about? And he said, I'm thinking about my greatest failure. And I paused, letting him fill that hole, and he said that I was unable to bring the hostages home after 444 days. And this was his greatest tragedy. And, you know, there were efforts to go in. So it was extraordinary to hear him talk about that personal failure. It was a moment for me, and obviously for him.
And something he likely reflected on frequently when at that church. We can be joined now by CBS's Elizabeth Campbell, who's outside Maranatha Baptist Church. Elizabeth, you've been preparing for this and our coverage of it for quite some time. We're in the final hours of this tribute. Remind us what's going to go on there behind closed doors and what happens in the hours to come.
Absolutely. We saw earlier today a chance for a grateful nation to pay their respects to former President Carter. What's happening behind me is a chance for a grateful community to pay their respects to Mr. Jimmy as they knew him. I've been talking to folks here who knew him best over the years, had dinner with him weekly, had walks with him, he would walk into their house without knocking if the door was unlocked. And it's really finally hitting them today in this moment. As you said, I've been preparing for this for years, not quite as many years as Z has, but I was really hit today when the flyover went by and the missing man formation and that jet peeled off. The solemn reverence that really just fell over this entire town of Plains is those who knew this moment was coming but weren't prepared for it. And now those folks are in beside the church behind me as we expect to hear from his personal pastor, Pastor Loudon, talk about how former President Carter really was known for his faith and for his hope, and how he held tight to both of those ideas through everything that he did.
Elizabeth Campbell there in Plains, Georgia. Susan Zirinsky in New York. Thank you both for joining us as we continue to honor the late president. We appreciate it, and we'll be back with you later. In political news tonight, President-elect Donald Trump is set to appear in a New York City courtroom tomorrow, either in person or virtually. But will the Supreme Court step in and halt his criminal hush money sentencing? We'll check in with our Aaron Navarro, who's following the Trump transition from West Palm Beach. Stay with us. That's next on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We all know that the relationship between Donald Trump and Mike Pence essentially ended 4 years ago this week. But in one of the most intriguing, colorful moments of this historic day, the former partners shook hands today while at Jimmy Carter's funeral here in Washington. The president-elect sat alongside bitter political rivals, including former President Obama, former President and Hillary Clinton, President Biden, and Vice President Harris. Quite a scene. If you didn't see it, the pictures alone are worth 1,000 words. Speaking of a guy who's worth at least 1,000 words, our Aaron Navarro, who's in West Palm Beach for us tonight. Aaron, good to see you. The president-elect, as you know, has at times avoided gatherings with other former presidents, specifically because he doesn't want to be seen among them, doesn't want to deal with the awkwardness of it all. But what did you make of what we saw today at the National Cathedral?
Ed, good to be with you. A lot of moving speeches, of course, during the ceremony itself, but also a lot of action as the former presidents, the president-elect, Vice President Harris, were getting seated. As you mentioned, this is the first time, at least publicly, that we're seeing Trump and his former Vice President Mike Pence at least interact. It was noticeable to me that Karen Pence did not look at or chat or shake hands with President-elect Trump or incoming First Lady Melania Trump. Also noticeable, the somewhat chummy chats, at least it seemed, between former President Barack Obama and President-elect Trump. Really striking when Vice President Harris, who was seated in front of them, looked back, saw the two speaking, and then looked again forward, stone-faced. Really striking, just given that Obama had campaigned for her when she was running against Trump. Of course, to see the two speak, given the week for her with certifying Trump's electoral victory, the wildfires in California, definitely a lot to take in.
You remember the scenes in the movie Anchorman when Will Ferrell and Christina Applegate are sitting there at the end of their newscast, and it looks like they're giving each other happy talk when really they were telling each other off? You wonder what exactly those two were talking about. Were they trading insults, or were they actually having a good conversation? We still don't know. We've asked. We've tried to find the lip readers who maybe can figure it out. Still unclear, but quite a scene to see. And Karen Pence getting a lot of credit for throwing shade at the Trumps, especially on social media. People were impressed that she apparently has game, as they said. Look, more urgently for the president-elect, he is now scheduled to be sentenced in his New York criminal so-called hush money case tomorrow, unless the U.S. Supreme Court steps in at some point tonight or early tomorrow morning. What are we hearing from the Trump team as he awaits a final ruling?
Yeah, interestingly enough, not much from them when it comes to this today, again, as it remains up to the Supreme Court. We do know that a prosecutor said actually earlier this week that Trump's team had told them if he were to attend this proceeding, which they, of course, have fought against, it would be done so virtually. So Trump remaining here in West Palm Beach if these proceedings continue in New York tomorrow.
We also learned today Google now joins the ranks of corporations giving at least $1 million to the president-elect's inauguration fund. Several other tech giants also doing this. Do we know, are we expecting more companies to do this? And do we have any sense of if they're getting something in return for this?
We know that Google and Boeing today are some of the companies that at least announced or news was revealed of their donations to the inaugural committee. It's striking to me, just given Google joins Meta and other, quote-unquote, big tech companies, in a sense, cozying up to Trump before this inauguration, especially as Trump and other Republicans seem to talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence, investing in more into that, talking about it in a more positive light, remaining at least the table for these conversations of potential government action when it comes to AI in a second Trump term is one potential impact that these donations could have down the line.
Aaron Navarro tracking the Trump transition for us after all that time spent in chilly Iowa, New Hampshire, and Michigan. You're getting some time in the sun down there in Palm Beach. You earned it, sir. Good to see you. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
A day of remembrance. Next, we'll hear from the son of former President Gerald Ford and the 38th president's message he left for the 39th president, Jimmy Carter. Stay with us. You're watching America Decides.
Now, I didn't like it, but little could I know that the outcome of that 1976 election would bring about one of my deepest and most enduring friendships.
That was former President Gerald Ford's son, Stephen, reading the eulogy that his father wrote for his predecessor before he died. To his successor before he died. I spoke to Stephen Ford earlier today and asked him what's been on his mind as the nation grieves for President Carter.
As you might have heard, it was 18 years ago when Dad had his funeral here, and I'll be honest with you, that day when Dad had his state funeral, I didn't hear much. I don't remember. You're just, lost in losing your father. And today, I was able to see it, feel it, and just try to be there with the Carter family, and try to, when I got a chance to speak a few words, try to represent what Dad wanted to say to his good friend Jimmy Carter.
Your father had been at the first gathering, Best American History Can Tell, of 5 living current and former presidents back in 1991. Mm-hmm. There was another today, but more importantly perhaps, or more poignantly, it's also a gathering of the siblings and the offspring of living and former presidents. I'm curious, when you attend something like this, when your family does, is there any kind of a kinship or relationship or sort of a knowing nod to the Carters or the Bushes or others who show up who have been, like you, the first children of a president?
We've all been through it. We've felt it. We've lived in the White House. It's America's home. It's a temporary lease on the house. You don't get to stay forever, and it's just an honor. Our family got thrown into the White House overnight because Richard Nixon resigned, and Dad literally overnight became president. There was no election, there was no campaign, so our experience was a little different than some of the other families, but again, it was just a blessing, and it was because of Mom and Dad, nothing we did.
The other thing that I was struck by in President Biden's remarks is how your family, the Carters, as he said, share their mother and father with the nation. Sharing between siblings is hard enough. I imagine having to share your mother and father at times can be really difficult.
It is, but there's something good that comes out of that, because you come together closer as a family, because the world kind of closes in on you a little bit, and you depend on your brothers and sister and everybody in the family. The experience in the White House for us, that's what it did for us, was bring our family closer together. And again, it was just a blessing. It came out of nowhere for our family. My father had been a congressman for 24 years representing Grand Rapids, Michigan. His goal was to try to be Speaker of the House. He became the House Minority Leader. He never thought of becoming President of the United States. So think about it. Dad was the first man to become President of the United States that did not go through a general election. He was appointed by Nixon and inherited the White House from Nixon. So it was a very unique presidency. But what we're focusing on today is that unique relationship that Dad and President Carter had. And I hope today was like a civics lesson, really, about how we can do this in this democracy. And they had a tough fight. The campaign in 1976 was rough and tumble, but for them to come out of that and develop a deep friendship, I think it speaks to what this country can be.
Next, we're going to speak with California's senior senator, Alex Padilla, a former LA city councilman, about the disaster unfolding in his state. No one better than him to explain what the government response will have to be like. Stay with us. You're watching America Decides. Firefighters are battling several blazes tonight in Southern California. Right now, we know at least 5 people have been killed, tens of thousands forced to evacuate. We're joined now by California's Democratic Senator, Senior Senator Alex Padilla, who is in his hometown of Los Angeles. Senator, for a variety of reasons, I wanted you to join us today. But first, because you are an LA resident, how are you? How is your family dealing with this fire?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, Ed. Thankfully, we're okay. Woke up yesterday morning just outside of the evacuation perimeter of the Hearst fire. Wouldn't have been the first time we'd have to evacuate in recent years, unfortunately, but thankfully all family and friends are accounted for. Everybody's safe. But our hearts go out for all the people who have been displaced. More than 100,000 throughout the region, given the number and scale of fires that you've been covering. So a lot of folks that need our prayers, need our help. And the good news is President Biden approved that major disaster declaration yesterday. So it's not just that help is on the way. People can begin to apply for at least the short-term assistance needed. Disasterassistance.gov is a website we'll be promoting quite a bit, as well as my website, padilla.senate.gov. A lot of information, a lot of links.
You are senior senator from California, and this is arguably going to probably define the rest of your term now as you try to get as much federal assistance as you can for California. I hate to ask it this way, but it is a reality here in Washington. Yours is a very blue state, and this is about to become a Republican-controlled town. How concerned are you about getting everything you need from the federal government once the Trump administration begins?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It shouldn't be a political conversation, but we'll have to do what's necessary to protect California and advocate for California. I guess some signs of hope. Number one, as blue as California is, there's still a lot of Republicans that live here as well. So I think a Donald Trump administration would want to think twice about wholeheartedly Xing out California and any assistance. Second, look, we're not the only state with disaster issues that need to be responded to. Wildfires are not confined to California. It's from California to Utah and everywhere in between. And of course, there's other types of disasters throughout the country, whether it's hurricanes in the southeast or tornadoes and floods elsewhere in America. Natural disasters caused by our changing climate is real, impacting red states and blue states combined. So we have to work together to respond to disasters in the short term and look at policy issues to try to mitigate and prevent in the long term.
You're a former LA City councilman. You at one time actually even served as acting mayor for a few days. So you have really thorough understanding of city operations, how it interacts with LA County. You know that the mayor, Karen Bass, has come in for a lot of criticism in the last several days over her management of this, her whereabouts when it began, and her budget priorities in the lead up to this. How do you assess the mayor's handling of these fires?
Yeah, well, I think I've heard a little bit of the critique, and I know she returned to Los Angeles as quickly as she could. She and I were in touch by phone, but most importantly for the people of Los Angeles and throughout Southern California, they should rest assured that federal, state, and local emergency response personnel, firefighters, and so many others are working very well, very collaboratively. We have too much experience dealing with disasters, whether it's other types of fires, floods, atmospheric rivers, or anything else. Our intergovernmental agencies work well together and have not skipped a beat in responding to these fires. I mean, look at the pre-positioning of assets because we knew of the conditions that we expected this week. Dry conditions, windy conditions, all it takes is a little fire and it can spread quickly, and that's exactly what we've seen. But thankfully, it's been a lot of mutual aid response, not just from other parts of California, central, northern California, but even out of state. I've seen fire trucks from multiple jurisdictions, National Guard on standby, and a major disaster declaration approved by President Biden that we're giving this everything we've got.
Senator Padilla, we're running up against a hard break, as we call it in this business. We'll talk to you again soon about the federal response to this, but we appreciate you taking a few minutes today. Our best of luck to you and your community. as you monitor this in a real way and then come back here to Washington. We'll talk about it again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Several prominent figures attended former President Jimmy Carter's state funeral today, including presidents who were elected by emulating his dark horse campaign strategy. CBS News' Lindsay Reiser breaks down exactly how a Georgia peanut farmer won the nation's most powerful office roughly half a century ago.
Jimmy Carter and his team knew the 1976 primary season would be different because of changes made following the 1968 election when Democrats lost by 110 electoral votes after a messy primary. So, to prevent party bosses from picking candidates behind closed doors, delegates would now be appointed based on a proportion of how many votes a candidate received. So, a candidate could still gain delegates even if they came in third in the state. And at the same time, Iowa moved to become the first in the nation election because its caucus took so long to organize. Carter decided to use these two changes to create a winning strategy. The year before the election, he campaigned in 250 cities across 40 states, and he aimed to get as many votes as possible in every single state instead of just winning all the delegates in a few big ones and ignoring the rest of the country. And he and his team also heavily invested in Iowa at a time when most major candidates ignored the Hawkeye state. But Carter knew that winning over Iowans would give him the media clout he needed for momentum. And sure enough, the media blitz came fast after his Iowa victory. Now, despite starting with no name recognition in a crowded field of 17 Democrats and having significantly less money than some of his opponents, Carter had more than 1,500 delegates a month before the convention. So his tactic of concentrating on gaining delegates in every state was a core reason why. For example, he lost in states like Massachusetts, New York, and Oregon. But as you can see there, he still picked up delegates in those states because he achieved a high enough vote total to get some. Add all the small gains along with delegates from victories in places like Texas and Michigan, and you get a presidential nominee. Now, Carter's dark horse victory revolutionized primary campaigns. Future presidents have used it to great success. Fellow Democrat Barack Obama shocked the political establishment with his Iowa win, and he used that momentum to succeed in other primary states while gaining delegates in the races he lost, ultimately propelling him to the presidency just like Carter. And the strategy also worked for President Donald Trump in 2016. He lost Iowa, but won every other early state before Super Tuesday, which helped supercharge the political narrative around him. And that is what helped keep him in the neck-and-neck race for delegates with Senator Ted Cruz until Trump ultimately came out on top.
That does it for today on this busy Thursday afternoon. We'll be back with our first ever Friday night edition. America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.